All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this edition of The Strategic Thinker from Spark Dental Network. I'm Dr. John Meis, and I'm here with the brilliant Heather Driscoll. How you doing, Heather?
I'm doing great, Dr. John. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. We had been predicting with the COVID experience that our practices have had, that after the shutdown, we'd see this big ramp up of demand, which we've seen that, most practices hitting records. But we also predicted that there was going to be a drop off. Number one, because of the general economy, the stopping of the federal unemployment, very rich benefits. And the second thing is that we've got a black hole in October, don't we?
We certainly do. So you're exactly right. We're seeing exactly what everyone in some ways hoped for, right? Which was this increase in patient flow. And that seems to really be projected to kind of carry us through the month of September. And then a big black hole in October. So certainly we're getting a lot of requests to kind of help now to be a bit more intentional and proactive to, hopefully save and salvage the month of October really before it's too late and they're just looking back on, skimming by, quite frankly.
So people know that there's this, hygiene appointment deficit in October, but I'm not sure that everybody really understands what the ongoing effect of that is. So we know that 70% of restorative care comes out of recall hygiene. If recall hygiene's down, doctor production is going to be down, right? And maybe that doctor production is in October, maybe it's lagged a little bit and in November, but most likely it's going to be both.
Absolutely. And I think people also are thinking, okay, let's just prepare for maybe a bit of a down October. But if we don't fix October, 6 months from October is April, and this just will continue to perpetuate itself if we're not careful.
Yep, round and round we go. April, it'll be recovered some because of new patient flow and whatnot and the way we schedule, but it'll continue to reverberate until it's fixed. And far better to fix it now. And when I say now, I mean like right now, right? We only got 20 days? Until we're in October and this mess starts to show up in our schedules. So Heather, I know you put together some thoughts on some of the creative things that we're doing in our own practices and creative things that we've seen other practices do, as well as just how to think about this and how to measure it and how to engage your teams and motivate your teams to start really going all out to make sure that we tackle this in the best way that we can.
You're exactly right. So I'll just maybe take a minute to kind of maybe throw up a few slides to help guide our conversation. Awesome. We've kind of lovingly nicknamed October the COVID crunch because that's really kind of feels, that's really kind of what it feels like. We're being crunched a bit to not just manage, what's a bit of an abundance of patients right now, but to really start preparing for that drop off. And so, we all know how we got here, right? We had the ADA recommendations back in the middle of March, where most practices switched to emergency care only, which led to really pretty much practice shutdowns from 4 weeks to 8 weeks, and depending on where you're located in the country, some of our clients even longer. So that 6 months from March and April equals September and October, which really is cutting into our hygiene flow, which, to your point, Dr. John, is ultimately where on average about 70% of all restorative care comes from. So it's certainly a crunch.
This is our profitability formula. And these little circles and the designations in there are, I first saw this from a presentation from the president of Dental Intel. And it's really talking about our profit is done by visits times production per visit times collections percentage minus the overhead. And that's what equals profit. And so anything that affects any one of these things can affect profit. Right. And so if we have one that's going to be hurt, we want to make sure it hurts as least as possible. And if we are going to get hurt, what can we do on the others to compensate so that we don't have a drop in profitability? Underneath each of these circles are our strategies on how we affect those things. And so there's, on this version, there's 23 different strategies. And so this really falls into what's going to happen, right? Because we're going to see a decrease in hygiene visits. So that's going to affect that column. Our production per visit for the office as a whole is going to be reduced because our restorative is going to look different. So a couple of different ways that we can go about making sure that we manage what's our demand with our overhead so that we maintain profitability to the degree that we can.
Right. And so what we hear people saying is, oh, now's the time to get really creative and start thinking out of the box. And quite frankly, I'm saying, no, get in the box and stay there, right? And so not that I think we can't get a little bit creative about our strategies, but I think now is the time to just go back to what's tried and true, quite frankly. And one of the best ways to do that is to take an assessment of your current state. So for some people, they're gauging October just by a visual reflection. You know, they might flip through the days of the week and they kind of go, yeah, it looks emptier than normal. They may or may not really have the data they need to really truly understand what performance is going to look like. And so we're really just advocating for people to, you know, take the pulse of your organization, do an assessment of the current state of what's scheduled. So back to that practice success formula, you know, the first element being the need for visits, people in the chair. So one of the things we're doing in our practice is just really reassessing, you know, how many visits were seen in hygiene in October of 2019 and how many visits do we have scheduled in October of 2020. You can see in this example a pretty significant deficit. So knowing that if, you know, nothing is done to improve what's scheduled, the outcome is going to be, you know, pretty bleak, quite frankly.
And in all but one of our practices, we've expanded capacity. So we really should be looking at scheduled last year. What's the increase in capacity? And, you know, so the goal isn't necessarily what you did last year. You know, it may be more, should be growth in every practice. But as a minimum, you know, you should be shooting for what you did last year.
Absolutely. So one of the things we're doing is really just keeping a continued focus on the progress our practices are making. And so again, just a real quick, easy report, letting them know, you know, where we're at for September as far as visits, where we're at for October, because I don't think it should come as any surprise to people on October 1st as to whether or not, you know, we're feeling good about what the month's going to look like, depending on, you know, the traction we're able to make in the next couple of weeks. That will dictate some of the other strategies we have to put in place, which we'll touch on here in just a moment as well. And to your point, depending on what your practice looks like from a capacity standpoint, the goal may not be just to meet last year's number of visits. If you've added providers, you know, provider days, extended hours, whatever the case might be, additional operatories, you may actually, you know, really need to revisit what that goal should be for number of visits.
So really some of the wisest of practice managers are recovering that number. What's the deficit today in their morning huddle? So the entire team knows where it is, and can make a sense of making progress.
Absolutely, because realistically, if we don't have patients, this isn't just a hygiene problem, right? This isn't just, oh, well, gosh, the hygienists are going to have to take a few days off. This ultimately really impacts the entire, you know, organization. And so it does need to be an all hands on deck, you know, kind of effort. And one of the ways to really get that started is just to ask yourself some really important questions. So a few of the things that we've been asking ourselves is just what we touched on. You know, do you know where you currently sit with your patient visits, which really starts the progress of everything else: productivity per visit, your collections percentage, your ability to manage overhead, all of those kinds of things. So what's the current state of your outlook for October? Really where everybody should be starting. How about the next one, Dr. John?
Yeah. We talk about this, till we're blue in the face with our clients and our own practices. And that is, how easy can we make it for patients? Meaning, do we have a lot of rules that keep patients out? Oh, we can only do this on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we can't do this until we do this. And are you having a bunch of hoops for patients to jump through in order for them to get on schedule? And the other thing is, are you using all the technology that's available? There's now real working live scheduling in your schedule that can be done online with a smartphone. That is the key to ease, just taking it up another notch. So everything that you can do to make it easy is going to make a difference on how well you're able to fill up October.
Definitely. And we all know that an hour is not an hour is not an hour, right? All hours aren't created equal. And so especially now when people are just, potentially getting back to work and kids getting back in school, may or may not, be in person, the ability to have an adequate amount of convenient appointment times is really going to be key. After, having been furloughed or, kind of sheltering in place for months, people are really unlikely to be asking for extra time off from their employers or taking their kids out of school. And so you may not normally, be working multiple late nights or multiple early mornings or Fridays or Saturdays, but we would just challenge you to reconsider that strategy, especially during the month of October.
Absolutely. And next is, we typically recommend that everyone send out a use it or lose it type marketing letter to all their patients, letting them know if they have insurance benefits left, that they're going to lose those benefits at the end of the year. There's no reason you can't start that early, right? Because you have many patients in your database that are due now and can come in now. And this is just one more thing to tip them over the edge to get them in. So you might as well use the use it or lose it letter now.
Right. And there's so many different platforms that really help our practices, gather these lists of patients who have benefits available, who have benefits that allow, for cleanings twice a year as opposed to every 6 months. You have perio maintenance patients. You have your own in-office, wellness plans and discount plans, which have no, frequency limitations. So there's this whole pool of patients just waiting to be, communicated with in hopes of, ending up as a scheduled appointment. It's just really dependent upon us to tap into that great resource. All right, the next one, flexibility in staffing. So the investment in our people, certainly the biggest expense in a dental practice. And I use the word expense a bit loosely because I don't usually look at people as an expense unless their presence doesn't result in something that ultimately leads to productivity. So having a plan in place for some elements of flexibility really starts to make sense. And Dr. John, I know you've been talking to, some of our Spark members about the need to start this conversation now. So do you want to touch on some of those discussions you're having?
Yeah. So in industries other than dentistry, occasional workforce reductions are extremely common. In some industries, they happen, several times a year. In dentistry, because our flow is so consistent, we don't really face this very often. And so our staff doesn't really have the experience of going through a workforce reduction. And so they don't really understand. They may be looking at this deficit in number of hygiene appointments and say, oh, that's no big deal. We'll just have a little more time to get some Starbucks and we'll sit around and we'll get to those things that we haven't gotten to. That may be their mindsets. So I think having the discussion of workforce reduction ahead of time that's not your goal. Your goal is to get everybody focused on making sure that you are getting those appointments made so that you have a full and busy October. That's the goal. And I know you can just take extra days off, and that maybe reduces some of the cost, but that also reduces some of the profitability. So our goal is to do that. And if we talk about this, then people start to understand how it's going to affect them. We all listen to the same radio station, What's in It for Me, WIIFM. And so if we can talk in a way that our teams understand as a business, this is what may be necessary in October. But if we do a good job now, if we do a good job in the next 21 days, this may not be necessary. And I don't want it to be necessary. This is, if we have to do this, it's because we either didn't do it well, or it just didn't happen. But I've seen in our own practices, and I've seen in the practices that have been focusing on this for a couple of weeks, that deficit is shrinking rapidly. And so, I think that it's possible to eliminate that deficit, but not without your team on board, not without their buy-in, not without their effort and their passion.
Absolutely. And if you're having these conversations, if one of the strategies really is to be a bit more flexible with the hours of operations and the times you're seeing patients, your team's much more likely to be committed to, picking up another late night or working on a Friday if they don't normally, if they understand, what the potential alternative might be. So I appreciate your reiteration of the fact that the goal isn't to eliminate or cut hours. The goal is to create an October that really requires everybody to be there, all hands on deck, taking really great care of our patients. So,
yeah, my hope is that everybody has a record month in October, but it's not going to happen by itself. It's going to take effort to get there.
Yep, definitely. The other thing is, I don't know how many times you talk to people and they talk to us about the things that aren't getting done that they'd like to get done. And here we have an opportunity potentially, if we don't, get to the point where we've eliminated that deficit with number of patient visits, we have an opportunity to maybe tackle some of those bigger projects or initiatives that are really important, but tend to get pushed to the back burner. So are you prepared with a list of initiatives for your team to work on if there is potential downtime? Recognizing again that investment of people and their time and their talents, it may not have an immediate payoff, right? Depending on what the initiative is, but ultimately it's going to help lead to, future improved productivity or future improved onboarding of new team members or retention of patients or whatever it is that the initiative may be. Now is a really great time to prioritize some of those things so that if you do have team members available who can do other things, let's put them to good use.
So what's an example of a project or initiative, Heather? What's your favorite ones here?
My favorite one is the actual documentation of onboarding a new team member. If I had $1 for every time someone said, I really need to put together, a few checklists or a manual to make it a bit easier to onboard new team members, that would be really great. Especially with the practices we work with, they're in growth mindset almost all the time. So whether that's the addition of people or providers, locations, whatever it might be, there's always this need to stay ahead of the curve as far as growth goes, and training of team members or, the development path of existing team members, always at the top of the list, but never enough hours in the day.
Yep. Again, we think with one mind, Heather. That was the number one that I had on my list. Number 2 on my list was fixing the absolute front end of the practice success loop. So that is increasing the number of contacts, making sure that you're answering all your phone calls, and that we improve the conversion rate. That's the other spot that I see people continue to struggle with, just because they don't take the time to focus on it. And in many practices, that's a really quick 20-25% bump if you fix that end of the success loop. So that's another project that's worth doing.
Yeah, so taking a few minutes to listen to phone calls and, see the range of effectiveness from one team member to another as far as answering the phone and converting to appointments, documenting, some loose scripts on how to answer the phone, whatever it might be. That's a really good one. I would support that. And really the last question we have for all of you is, do you feel confident with the plan you have in place for October? And if any of you are saying, I don't have a plan, it's not too late, right?
And you shouldn't feel confident, right? The answer to that question is no.
Yes. Your confidence should be a bit lower, absolutely. But the good news is there's still time. And for us in our own practices, our plan continues to evolve, quite frankly. Whether it's, continuing to double down on, getting those patients on the schedule and the number of visits increased, or really figuring out, again, like what do our hours of operation need to look like? Do we need to borrow team members from one location for another if there's one in excess and one in a deficit? Really just looking at your overall organization as a whole and really figuring out where the best return on your energy and effort and talents of your team members is going to be for the month that may be a bit of a challenge.
Awesome. Very good.
All right. So I always feel like we get stuck in dentistry sometimes thinking that a month has happened to us, right? Oh, October wasn't very good for us, as opposed to really being a bit more intentional and proactive and kind of taking the lead on making sure that October doesn't happen to us, but that we determine what October is going to look like for us. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to really kind of dictate the path and set the course. And I think we could see some record Octobers for those people who are really getting serious about this.
I think so too, Heather. It's not going to happen on its own, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility for those who take this seriously, that put the time and resources necessary to make this happen. So thanks, Heather, very much. This is another episode of The Strategic Thinker. And we're in this peri-COVID time, and a tool that might be helpful for many of you is our COVID-19 survival tool. And so if you go to sparkdentalnetwork.com and go to the tools tab, you'll see it right there. Go ahead and download that. It was designed to have us, carry us and help us in our thinking all the way through COVID to when COVID is no longer a concern and no longer something that is affecting our practices. So with that, we'll say goodbye, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Strategic Thinker.
Thanks, Dr. John.
Thanks, Heather.